Today we're meeting with Dr. Chuck Diviney again, and we're going to talk about happiness today. And I think it would be good to make the disclaimer that none of us claim to be authorities on the subject of happiness, although Chuck would be the one that can opine the most. And we don't claim to be happy all the time, which is just off camera before we started. You said that would be a good place to begin. So what does happiness mean in the context of how often you feel happy?
Well, happiness is really about life satisfaction. And if I'm satisfied with my life, then I'm going to feel happy more times than not, definitely. Happiness has been a branch of psychology recently of interest in the field. For so many decades, psychologists and mental health professionals studied depression and studied anxiety. And for the longest time, it was just believed that happiness was not something that we could measure. Happiness was not something we could study. About 40, 50 years ago, a group of professionals, positive psychologists, if you will, took on the venture of studying happiness. And for decades, they have looked at happiness around the world, different aspects of happiness, what makes people happy. And in a documentary actually called Happy, it's a documentary from 2011, which is accessible on YouTube, Amazon, Netflix. In that documentary, they present a lot of their findings. And one of the things that they noticed when they started focusing on happiness, they would teach classes in college, they would go around, they would write books, they would do seminars. And time again, those were the most filled classes. Those were the most popular books. Those were the most popular seminars. Because people really do want to know what happiness is about, how to fulfill their happiness. We live in a world right now where, for instance, in the United States of America, we are probably one of the most unhappy cohorts in terms of American generations. They present some findings from around the world, and people in Tokyo, for instance, are some of the most unhappy people in the world. They have an epidemic there going on where people actually die from unhappiness. They're dropping dead literally from being unhappy and unfulfilled in their lives. And although we don't have that same epidemic going on here in America, we often have people that are uninvested in their lives, in their relationships, in their careers, in their families, with their friends. So the presentation of these findings is amazing. When I first saw the documentary and started learning about happiness and what they found in their research, it changed my life. It got me to focus on different areas of my life rather than a pinpoint part of my life. The first area, well, they break happiness into two things, two areas, extrinsic and intrinsic, and that just means external sources of happiness and internal sources of happiness. In the extrinsic sources of happiness, the first one that they came up with was money. And you have your groups of people. Some people say money doesn't buy happiness, and other people say, oh, all the money in the world buys happiness, and they're both wrong. The research looked at people who were making $5,000 a year versus $50,000 a year, and who would you think was more happy?
Well, I think I've heard that they said that they've done recent studies that say $75,000 a year and up doesn't make any difference. Once you hit $75,000, it makes no difference. So
okay, now you're giving the punchline.
Yeah, so between the $5,000 and the $50,000, I would think the $50,000.
50,000, and that's what they said. 50,000 people who make 50,000 are generally more happy than people who make 5,000. If we take a look at that, and I'm not going off of their research, I'm hypothesizing here, but I'm thinking if I make $5,000 a year, I can't afford rent, I can't afford a car, I can't afford food, I can't afford the basic necessities of my life. Yeah, I'm desperate.
Every day is desperate.
I'm begging, I'm pleading, I'm crawling, and that's not happy. But if I have 50,000, then I can take a family vacation every year, and I can have a house, and it's not the most lucrative, but there's definitely room for me to take care of my basic needs, what Maslow considered your basic needs: food, shelter, water, clothing. Take care of those and have a little bit of security as well.
In fact, did you know that's basically what the LDS Church's welfare program
came
about?
Yeah.
Their same thought was, people aren't going to listen to missionaries and listen to messages of Jesus' love and salvation if their stomachs are growling and if they're cold.
Right.
And they said we have to meet certain basic physical needs before people can think about their spirituality.
Well, now there's scientific research that supports the LDS doctrine that says people aren't going to come into therapy and do, these soul-searching activities and increasing their happiness and dealing with the conflicts in their life if they don't have a job and they don't have food and they don't have a place to live. They're not going to engage in the therapeutic process. Very similar notion. So anyways, they looked at the other cohort, 50,000 versus $50 million. Who's happier? What'd you say?
And they said we noticed no difference.
They're the same.
Beyond a certain minimum.
Yes.
Everything above that doesn't really make an appreciable difference in happiness.
Right. And that they present that in this documentary in their research. And what they also look at is over time, since the 1950s, Americans have made greater amounts of wealth. We are making more money than ever before any other generation in America. But our happiness just kind of fades down.
And that surprised them, didn't it?
Yes.
The researchers were very surprised when they said we were amazed to see no appreciable difference beyond such a low number, relatively speaking.
Well, it went up a little bit in the 50s and 60s when we made more money, and then it just kind of leveled off, and money kept going up. And so, by looking at that, as having done research myself, when you see something like that, that's significant, and you want to go in and find out why. Well, they're taking a look at other things. They found the other sources of extrinsic happiness, external, is image. What do I look like? How do I look? There's some research on that about people who suit up, dress up, show up, that kind of thing, and people who invest some time into what they look like actually feel better about themselves. They feel happy. The other item was status, and status is different for everyone. For instance, I'm a doctor, and so there's a lot of happiness in having achieved my degree and done the education and opened up a business and CEO, and that is a part of a status. Okay, so whatever we do in our life, whatever we're trying to achieve, that's part of our external happiness, or some of those goals relative to career or money or what have you. Then they looked at a flip side of this thing, intrinsic happiness. And, you work a lot with divorce and that, and you probably see people who are really unhappy. And I would say that there's a reason why, a big reason. The first one that they talk about with intrinsic happiness is relationships. And what I see with relationships is that when people are hyper-focused on all of their extrinsic sources of happiness, what ends up happening is they sacrifice relationships. They sacrifice the other parts of this intrinsic happiness. And relationships almost become that trophy wife or trophy husband, if you will. And so when I'm looking at trying to build someone's happiness, it's about nurturing and feeding those relationships in their life, spending time with their loved ones, opening up, being vulnerable, sharing what's going on in their heart and their soul, working together on goals.
And it's not empty calories work, is it?
No, it's a lot of work. Marriage is one of the hardest things that we do, but it's one of the most rewarding things that we do.
What I hear you saying then is that some people think, well, I think if they get used to affluence and tying their happiness to that, they would say, I'm not going to go to that child's performance at school.
Right.
Because that will cost me $1,000 in work.
Yes.
And I'll make it up to them later by buying them an Xbox or spending a little
time. And you
time.
can't make that up. And the relationship isn't about buying things for people.
But are we just dealing with Hallmark card philosophy here, though?
No. This is about spending quality time with the people in your life.
And if you don't get it, what happens to you?
You are going to be miserable. Those people leave.
You die face down in your Tokyo office.
Yeah, exactly. Why? I think you have to picture relationships as like a grapevine, and you water that vine and you fertilize it and you nurture it, And then the minute you go and take care of something else and leave it, it shrivels up, it dries out. And a relationship is very similar. If I'm not paying attention, if I'm not invested, if I'm not spending time with the people in my life, then what ends up happening is that the family, the relationships, the friends, they drift away, they go away. We begin to start getting paranoid, questioning, do they really love me? Am I valuable in their life? We have to be able to show someone that they're valuable in order to feel valuable. Be the change you want to see in the world, Mahatma Gandhi. It's that idea that if I want to feel valuable, I have to show other people that they're valuable too. I have to invest that work because they will invest in return, very likely. The second area of intrinsic happiness was community service. When I belong to the community, when I give back to the community, I feel worthy. I feel belonging. And those are higher up on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, definitely. People who are invested in the community tend to live longer. They tend to feel worthy. They tend to have goals met. They have a forward progression in their life, all this movement in their life where they're feeling significant. The final area that most of us cut, this is the area we cut the quickest, and I would call it the saddest, is personal growth. And personal growth is really identifying what is it in my life that I want to achieve? What is it that I am about? Who am I? Where have I come from? Where am I going to? There's these questions of spirituality, purpose and meaning that we ask ourselves, that we focus on. Most people, when I ask them, what do you do for fun? What do you do in your spare time? Oh, I sleep and I work. That's what they tell me. And so what most of these people are miserable.
And when you say these are the people that come to see you for
Yes.
help, or
Yes.
just everybody?
And then everyone. I mean, people. I'm incapable of small talk, so
particularly-
I'm always talking about research.
Particularly the people that come to see you.
Yes.
But there's